Are seed snails a good idea? Do they grow better seedlings? I first came across this idea a couple years ago, but it seems like this year it's really catching on and everybody wants to try seed snails. In this program, I'm going to look at the claims for seed snails and try and understand whether or not this technique makes sense. I'm going to split my review into two programs. In this program, what I've done is I've gone out and looked at about 16 different videos on YouTube. These are the top ones that come up when you do a search on YouTube. I've listened to all of them. There's about 3 hours of videos, and I've picked out all the claims that they make for seed snails. And we're going to analyze each of those. The one thing I found really surprising is that in all these videos, not one person actually tested the seed snails. Now, sure, they did make seed snails. They did germinate seeds. They got some green stuff growing in the seed snails. But that's not testing. That's just trying the technique to see how it works. If you want to know whether a technique actually makes sense and whether it's better than other techniques, you have to run controls. You have to do the seed snail, and right beside it in the same conditions, you have to use traditional method. Only then can you say that the seed snails are working better. I couldn't find one video where they did this. I've also gone to a number of Facebook groups and looked through the chats. Almost no one's ever compared them. Now, I did find one comparison in my Facebook group, Garden Fundamental, and they did a side-by-side test to compare seed snails to soil blocking, and they found soil blocking produced much better seedlings. So in my second video, I'm actually going to run some tests, compare seed snails to a potting method, which I'll discuss in this video, to growing in single pots. In my next video, I'm going to run side-by-side tests to see how well seed snails actually work. Let's have a look at the claims people make. Seeds germinate faster. Now, most of the videos didn't actually say that, but this is the main reason people are using seed snails. When I look in discussion groups, everyone's really happy about the rate of germination. The seeds are germinating so much faster in seed snails. Of course, they didn't do side-by-side comparison, so they can't actually reach that conclusion. But that's the impression people are left with. One of the biggest claims and one of the biggest benefits is that it saves space. Is that really true? Claim number 3, there's no need for pots and trays. Claim 4, this technique encourages deep roots. Now, people use different terminology for this. Some people say seed snails cause the roots to grow down more than sideways. Some claim larger root system. And then there's talk about root training. Is that really important? Another claim is that at planting time, the seedlings are very easy to separate from one another. And lastly, if you use seed snails, you don't have to pot up your seedlings. Those are the top 6 claims that I found, and I'm going to have a close look at each one of these. As I go through the claims and discuss them with you, I'm going to show images from the videos that I looked at. This will show you seed snails produced by a lot of different people. It'll show some of the pros and cons of those seed snails. And the information in those videos will help us better understand whether these claims are true. And finally, I'm going to come up with my own list of cons. What are the disadvantages of these seed snails? Claim number 1. Seeds germinate faster in seed snail. Well, I have news for you. The seeds don't actually know they're in a seed snail, so it can't affect the rate of germination. What affects germination rates is the type of seed you have, the amount of moisture you give it, and the temperature. I germinate most of my seeds using the baggie method. My seeds are laying on a wet paper towel, and they germinate just fine. They don't even have to be in soil. So the type of soil you use and whether you roll it in a seed snail or you put it in a pot makes no difference. Provided they're all getting the same temperature and the same amount of moisture, they will germinate at the same rate. This claim that seed snails germinate them faster is simply not true. It's busted. The next claim is that seed snails save space. And this seems to be probably the most important reason for people using this technique. Now, to discuss this, it's important to compare seed snails to some other method. What a lot of users are doing is they're comparing seed snails to the traditional way of using trays and the little cells that hold 6 plants, the cells that are very common in nurseries. And it's true that I can have a small seed snail, that has a dozen plants in it, and it takes up less space than these cells. But when we do these kind of comparisons, it's important to compare apples with apples. A seed snail has very little soil compared to these other trays. That means we have smaller root systems. The seed snails are also very crowded with plants, so they're not growing as well. In this other system, the plants are separated farther apart. They're getting good light and they're growing better. So it is true that if you do this comparison, that seed snails take up less space, but you're sacrificing the quality of the seedling. Now here's one of my seed snails. Plants are growing really well. It's got like 20 different seedlings in here. I fooled you. This isn't a seed snail. This is the way I grow seedlings if I want them all in the same pod. I use one pod, put soil in it, put the seeds on top. This grows plants just as well as a seed snail. Now granted, the plants are all crowded here. They're not getting enough light, but I'm saving a lot of space. And I do use this method from time to time. This, by the way, is one of my streptocarpus pots. I start the seeds in these pots. I let them grow for a little while, and then I take them out and pot them up individually. One of the seedlings from this pot now looks like this. Believe it or not, this plant came out of this pot. These are from the same seed pod. The difference is that here they're crowded, they're not getting enough light, they're not growing really well, but they're still alive, just like a seed snail. In an individual pot, they grow bigger leaves and they're already flowering. Now this is a much better comparison with seed snails as far as space goes. And this takes up no more space than a seed snail. So you can see that if you do a proper comparison, seed snails are not saving space. Claim number 3, you don't need any pots or trays. Now this would be a benefit because you don't have to go out and buy plastic material. You use recycled plastic paper for your seed snail, and you don't have to go out and buy anything. Well, I've been recycling my pots and trays for many, many years. The pot I just showed you is probably 20 years old, and I just reuse it over and over again. So recycling really isn't that big of an issue, because if you buy good quality, they will last a long time. The one thing I found kind of funny is that some people make this claim, but use pots and trays anyways. Here's one of the videos. They made a big splash about the idea that they can get rid of their pots and trays. But later on in the same video, they show the finished seed snail sitting in trays. In other videos, they take these seed snails and actually put them into pots. These seed snails don't stay upright very well, and so they use pots or trays to hold them in place. You also need to water these. And most people water from the bottom, so they have to sit them in water, and they use trays for doing that. So the idea that you're not using pots and trays really isn't much of a claim. Claim number 4, seed snails encourage deep roots. The roots are forced to grow down, and that's actually true. You get longer roots, and some people say that you get root training. Well, what is root training? Now, this idea, I think, comes from growing trees. Some trees have big tap roots, and we want the roots to grow down and deep when they're small seedlings. Some people will germinate those in quite tall pots to give them lots of room for their taproot. But none of the videos I looked at were growing trees. They're growing perennials, annuals, vegetables. None of those need root training. In trees, it can be important because when they grow roots that circle around in a pot, as they get bigger, the roots get larger and larger, and they actually constrict the trunk and kill the plant. That's true of a woody plant. It's not true of a herbaceous plant, and that's what most of you are growing. Girdling roots are not an issue there, so we don't have to train them. Now, are longer, deeper roots a benefit? Nobody explains why that's a good thing. They just say it and claim it's a benefit. Well, think about when we take these seedlings outside. We now have to dig a deeper hole to plant them. That's more work for you. Is that a good thing for the seedling to have the roots nice and deep? Well, let's look at what happens in nature. If you take this same seed and you plant it outside in the ground and leave it alone, let it do its own thing, what does the root system look like? Well, most of the roots grow sideways. They don't grow deep. And there's a good reason for that. The soil near the surface is warmer, particularly in spring when you're taking your vegetables and taking them outside. That's where all the air is and the moisture is. That's what roots want. There's also more organic matter in the top layer. So that's where the nutrients are. The farther down in the soil we go, the colder it is, the less oxygen we have, and the less nutrients we have. Roots don't like that. They grow at the top. In fact, when we look at very large trees, you've got an 80-year-old tree, most of its roots are in the top 1 to 2 feet of soil. There's really no benefit to training deeper roots. Now, it is true, seed snails will force roots to grow deeper because they can't grow sideways into the plastic that's holding that small layer of soil. But it's not a benefit. So this claim is busted. Claim number 5, the seedlings are easy to separate from one another. Well, as the seedling grows, the roots can't grow in one dimension because the plastic is holding it into this narrow strip of soil. They can grow in the other direction, and they can grow down. So seedlings are generally growing their roots to their neighbors and to their neighbors and so on, but they still get tangled up. When I'm growing a bunch of seedlings in a single pot, the roots also get intermingled, but separating them isn't any more difficult than in a seed snail. In fact, if you watch the videos that are promoting seed snails and you watch it down to the end where they're taking them apart and planting, you see that the roots are pretty tangled and they're not all that easy to separate. If this is a real concern, the best way to grow these seedlings are in individual pots. This is one of the reasons why the commercial trays are so popular. Each seedling just pops out and you don't damage the roots from the neighboring seedling. When I grow perennials, and I've grown a couple thousand different kinds of perennials from seed, I generally grow them in a single pot. I pull out the excess, so I'm left with maybe 6 or 8 seedlings, and then I dump the pot out, separate the seedlings, and pot them up into larger pots. Perennials grow rather slowly, and so they generally stay in pots for about a year before I put them in the garden. I find if I put them in the garden sooner, I forget about them, I don't water them enough, and they just die off, or they get weeded out by mistake. So I like to grow them a little larger, and that usually takes about a year in a pot. Separating out a pot of 6 to 8 seedlings is pretty simple, and you're not doing a lot of root damage there. But of course you are doing some. Once they're put in their individual pots, they seem to recover quite well. Are seedlings grown in seed snails easy to separate? They're not easier to separate in the snails compared to individual pots. So I don't think this is a strong reason to use seed snails. Number 6, the traditional way of starting seeds is to put a bunch of seeds in a pot, let them germinate, and separate out the seedlings and take each one and put it in its own pot. Now I modified that method by using my baggie method. So I use a baggie method to germinate the seed, and then I put each seed, once it's germinated, into its own pot. So I kind of do the initial planting and the potting up in one step. That grows the best seedling. Now, do seed snails eliminate potting up? Well, that really depends on you. Do you want to grow really good, strong seedlings? If that's your goal, then you have to pot up. And here's why. If you use a seed snail to germinate these seeds and grow them for a little while, they start to compete with each other for light. Now, when plants are growing close together, we think of root competition, but that's really not much of a competition. There's lots of soil for their root, and provided you keep it watered, there's lots of moisture. Where you have the real competition is for light, and this is particularly true for home gardeners. You might think you have bright lights because you bought some shop lights. That's not bright light. Even on a windowsill, that's not bright light compared to what they're used to outside. So your seedlings are growing in a dark cave, and now you use a seed snail, pack them in really closely together so that when the leaves start growing, they shade each other. and they don't grow very well. Remember my community pot here? The reason these leaves are so small still and it's not flowering is because they're too crowded for light. Even though I have quite good grow lights, they're still not getting enough light to grow properly. So do seed snails save you potting up into larger pots? Well, yes. I mean, I could grow them like this forever, but you're not growing good plants this way. So it really depends on what your goal is. If you want strong, healthy, large plants, this is too crowded. You've got to pot them up. Potting up also means that when you plant them out, you're going to do very little root damage and they're going to take off right away. If I take something like this and take them outside, sure, I can put them in the ground, but I'm going to do root damage here. Now the plant has to recover from the root damage before it can start growing. If you have a short growing season, that's not good for vegetables. Now, some of the videos I looked at also presented cons as well as the pluses, and I'd like to have a look at some of these cons now. One comment several people made was that the seed snails dried out fairly quickly. Now, as long as you're attentive and you're watering them regularly, that's not an issue. But seedlings don't like to have dry periods and wet periods and dry periods. That slows down their growth. So drying out can be a problem. Probably the biggest problem with seed snails is that plants don't grow nearly so well, especially compared to growing them in an individual pot. Individual pots have more soil, they allow the plant to get more light, and you're going to grow better plants. This is simple biology. Seed snails are more work. I can fill a pot with soil in like 20 seconds. Seed snails take 5-10 minutes to put together. And quite honestly, they make a tremendous amount of mess. A couple videos bragged about the fact that they were growing good root systems, and the roots were coming right out of the bottom of the snail. I don't see that as a plus. I see that as a negative. Now, it's great to see great roots growing, but once they come out the bottom of these snails, the roots are going to get damaged. Every time you move this snail around, you're going to damage those roots. That's not good for plant growth. So not having a bottom in this system is actually a negative. All right, so what is my overall impression? I'm sure you've guessed that by now. I really can't find a single good reason to use seed snails. The best way to germinate plants is to germinate them in a baggie system. That takes almost no space whatsoever. You can see the germination take place, and then you take that germinated seedling and pot it up into its own pot. That grows the best seedlings, and it will grow faster seedlings. Now, I understand not all of you have enough space to do that. So the second best way is simply to use round pots, a single pot system, and put several plants in there and grow them that way. That will grow seedlings that are just as good as a seed snail and a whole lot less work. Now, do seed snails work? Sure they do. They grow seedlings. And for some things, they might work just as well as pot. So a lot of people do their onions in it, because onions are very skinny stems. There's less light competition. So for that, they work. Seed snails will also work for plants that are very slow growing, because they'll take a while before they compete for light. But for most of the annuals and vegetables you're starting, they're not a great idea. Now, I'm basing that conclusion on almost 50 years of gardening, and I've grown many things from seed. I've used almost all the other seed starting methods, but I haven't done seed snails, so I'm going to give them a try. I'm going to do side-by-side testing and show you the results in a future video. And once it's released, I'll put a link to it in the description, and I'll also link to it at the end of this video. Happy seed starting. Thank you very much for your support. If you'd like to connect directly with me, the best way is through my Facebook group, Garden Fundamentals. We'll answer all of your questions there. I also have a blog called Garden Myths, where I've debunked over 2,000 different myths. I'll put links to all of these in the description below. Happy gardening.